Hello, I'm Marlon Weems, and I am the publisher of the Journeyman newsletter and founder of the Journeyman Media Network. And I am delighted to have a special edition of the Journeyman Unfiltered. But before we get started, I want to introduce my co host, Miss Shari Dunn. And Shari's an attorney, a journalist, former broadcast journalist, and author of Qualified. She's also a founding member of the Journeyman Media Network. And Shari, I when I lined this up, you were the first person that I thought of in terms of who could help me make the best of the conversation that we're about to have.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited and really interested to hear what Daryl has to say. Lots of questions about
Well,
this
we
account.
yeah, we were just talking off stage. I mean, I spoke to her about a year ago. I think it was a year ago last month. And at the time, the big topic of discussion was tariffs. And I mean, it's still on the radar screen, but there's so much more going on. So my hope is that this will be an informative conversation and something that everyone can get something out of. So now to introduce Daryl Fairweather, she is the chief economist at Redfin. And Daryl is one of the country's most respected economists, and I would say a leading voice on housing, economic trends, consumer behavior. Before joining Redfin, she was a senior economist at Amazon. And earlier in her career, she was a researcher at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Currently, she's on the Academic Advisory Council for the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank, and she holds a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago, as well as a bachelor's degree from MIT. So, in other words, uh, Daryl has spent much of her career studying the very things that are going on right now that all of us are dealing with. So, um, I look forward to a lively and informative conversation. And so we will start things off. And on the other side, we'll have a conversation with Daryl Fairweather.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please.
Hello, Miss Fairweather, and welcome to Journeyman Unfiltered. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Well, I appreciate you making time for us. I know there is plenty going on to keep you busy. Um,
Mhm.
one of the things that when I thought about this, I think just looking at the sort of the correlation between what's happening with the oil market and just the whole global situation, and then on the other side of it, I always look at how markets react to those things, and I saw a clip that I think you did on, maybe it was Instagram or TikTok, that was talking about during the Memorial Day holiday, how prices kind of went down. There's this talk that there was a deal, and it's yeah. I would just like for you to kind of go into the idea I think that people have, that all that needs to happen is the Strait of Hormuz opens up and everything will go back to normal.
Well, I don't know if people have that idea, Marlon. I
Huh?
think the administration is promoting that idea. I think
Well, I
people,
think I think it's being sold. I'll put it that way.
yes, they're
It's certainly being,
trying
that's
to
the
sell
narrative, that
that.
all we got to do is just get this straight back open.
Yeah, yeah, that's what they're trying to sell us.
Yeah, and I think that narrative was true for a moment because when the conflict in Iran or the war in Iran or whatever you want to call it first happened, it was advertised as being a short thing, not a forever war, just a short conflict in and out. But then the Strait of Hormuz shut down, and that impacted global markets for oil and gas, which is and will continue to have global consequences for the economy. And the longer that it goes on, the less able you are to just turn off that switch and for things to go back to normal. Some of the damage is going to, if not be permanent, is going to last much longer than even the Strait of Hormuz has been shut thus far. If it reopens, that will have immediate consequences, especially for mortgage rates, which is what I focus on, because mortgage rates are really about what's going to happen 10 years into the future. And a lot of investors don't know if 10 years into the future, there's going to be a more restrictive global economy where people aren't, or countries aren't going to want to trade with one another because they're worried about these sort of conflicts and being so reliant on Mideast oil, or if the Strait reopens and then global commerce is able to kind of go back to the status quo. But the longer that it stays shut, I think the more we move towards this future where the global economy is, if not permanently, long-term impacted by what has happened so far.
So for people that don't know, why is it that this affects the housing market at all?
Yeah, that's a great question.
You know, what's the correlation between what's happening, halfway around the world, and why is my house so expensive?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems so unrelated, but the channel by which it impacts the housing market is the mortgage rate. So that's the cost of borrowing in order to finance a house. And the cost of borrowing is really just the cost of money, like how willing are lenders, or how able are lenders to lend out money to everyday Americans in order to buy homes. And when lenders are calculating what interest rate they're going to charge everyday Americans to buy homes, they're doing these economic projections into the future. They're projecting what interest rates will be into the future and what inflation will be into the future. So if inflation goes up, that means that money is going to be less valuable 10 years from now than it is right now, or even just a couple of years from now. It's going to be less valuable into the future. So when you go to make your mortgage payment 10 years from now, that money that you're paying to the bank is less valuable if there is more inflation, and it's more valuable if there is less inflation. So if lenders believe that there is going to be more inflation, or the inflation is going to last longer than what they thought before the conflict started, they are going to have to charge higher interest rates to compensate for the fact that this future money isn't going to be as valuable. And the Strait of Hormuz, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think for the average person, they can think of it like their retirement, right? Mm-hmm. You can have X number of dollars today, but based on inflation, that's going to not have the same weight or the same value later. So I think for the average person, that helps them kind of conceptualize what you're saying. Is similar, right?
Yes, it's similar. And some people will say, well, it's the Fed's job to control inflation. But the way that the Fed controls inflation is by increasing interest rates. So just the fact that inflation will or could be a problem in the future means that no matter what you're looking at, whether you're looking at interest rates, real interest rates that the Fed sets, or whether you're looking at inflation, both expectations are going to make mortgage rates more expensive, higher now than they would have been just the day before the conflict started. And it's because of the oil. The Strait of Hormuz impacts the cost of oil. Oil is an input into just about everything in the economy because we ship products all over the world, and oil is used to produce so many products that when the cost of oil goes up, it will impact inflation just across the board. And that's why the Strait of Hormuz is so important to inflation, is so important to interest rates, and is so important to mortgage rates.
You know, when we talk about controlling inflation, I remember hearing an economist talk about this. And first of all, I wanted to say Chicago, yay. I went to Northwestern Law School. So nice. The UFC was over there looking real imposing. We're more casual over in the lakefront. But I wanted to get this right, that to control inflation, you do slow down the economy, and that then reduces the overall demand, which can lead to job losses and prevent wage growth. And that tends to impact lower income folks, people of color more. And so I remember hearing that and I thought, wait a minute. So is this correct, that connection between controlling inflation and the impact it can have on people who are last hired, first fired, or whose wages are already depressed? I mean, inflation is controlled, but my life might not be so great if I'm in that group. Does that make sense? Or is that a misunderstanding of what the person was saying?
That's correct. But inflation in and of itself is harmful to the economy because it just raises the cost of everything. We're already feeling this when we go to pay for gas at the pump, that if you're, spending 10% more on gas, that means you have less money left over to afford everything else in your life. So that also impacts low income people who are already living paycheck to paycheck already. They just don't have the extra money to pay for gas. But then the tool that the Fed has for bringing inflation down is to raise interest rates, essentially suck money out of the economy. And when they suck money out of the economy, employers, firms have less money to employ people with. And then the people that they tend to fire first, that tends to be lower wage workers, it tends to be young workers. So who gets impacted by unemployment does tend to fall more on vulnerable groups, whereas inflation, I think, is more broadly felt. Like if you are lucky enough to keep your job, maybe you don't care the unemployment rate went up, but everybody notices when gas prices go up. And that's why gas prices can have such high political consequences, even more so than unemployment at sometimes.
But economic policy is what I'm hearing. There are losers. And
Yes.
what I often am frustrated by when here in Oregon, we are in the middle of a situation. I don't know if you know, but we're in the middle of a situation. The question is, are we in a death spiral? An economic death spiral. And you probably are familiar with that. Like we have all these factors moving that are creating problems. But what I had said, there was a presentation for community leaders that I went to. We are not honest about the fact that our economy anticipates losers. And if we were honest about that, and then we had infrastructure to address that, so more robust social programs, that would be one thing. But we pretend the economy does not anticipate losers, or the way people talk about it. Does that make sense, Marlon and Daryl?
Well, yeah, I mean, but I will defer to the economist.
I think what you're talking about with there being winners and losers is that there are no perfect solutions. There are always going to be trade-offs, right? I mean, there are some policies that can make everybody better off. Those are the kinds of policies that, for example, like reduce pollution. If you reduce pollution, everybody gets cleaner air. And maybe the winners are very narrow, like it's the polluting firms that have to suffer a little bit, but you get this really large net benefit. But no matter what policy you're looking at, there are going to be winners and losers to that policy. And that even includes the decision to start a conflict halfway around the world. You can't do something like that and just ignore the economic consequences that are very real to people. And people get really irritated when politicians and policy leaders act like there aren't these trade-offs, there aren't these winners and losers associated with their policies.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things, and I guess this is, kind of big picture, but when we talk about, just the position the Fed is in, where we got interest rates that are, rising or inflation is rising, I should say. And then on the other side, maybe, we maybe haven't fallen off the cliff on the job side, but I would say maybe sluggish is a way to describe it. So to me, that sounds like stagflation. Is it? Or if not, why not?
No, I think it is stagflationary. I mean, I guess what counts is like when you cross that threshold into stagflation, I think is up for debate. But what's happening both with the trade war and the war in Iran is that the ability of the economy to produce things has been restricted. And when that happens, like the economy gets slowed down at the same time that things get more expensive. And that really is what stagflation means, that the economy is slowed down and prices go up. People might argue that right now it's not stagflation because the economy is still growing. But if you're comparing it to the type of economy that we would have without these stagflationary forces, there's still stagflation going on. It just maybe isn't showing up as strongly as it did back during the 70s and 80s because the economy has other things going on that makes it a bit more resilient. But I always think about what universe would we be in that could be so much better, where unemployment would be even lower, where prices would be even lower, and everybody would have more leftover income and they would feel better off. Like, that's what I think we should be comparing ourselves to, not the economy of the 80s.
So how much do you, I am constantly thinking about tariffs because just coming from, where I come from, this is like 101 in terms of who pays tariffs, who, the results and so forth. And I'm just curious to, hear your thoughts on how much tariffs are a factor in the current environment.
Or the threat, or even the threat, right? Not just the actual, but the threat of tariffs, right?
Yeah, tariffs, I believe, are contributing to inflation. It's hard to know exactly how much, because some people might argue that, the economy is so resilient that firms are figuring out ways to navigate around tariffs that really isn't having that big of a deal. But I think it did have a big deal. This time last year, when tariffs were implemented, mortgage rates went up even above what they are right now. Like, we're talking about how the war in Iran is increasing mortgage rates, but back when tariffs were announced, mortgage rates went up even more. The market totally freaked out. And even when you go to shop for things at the store, like, I notice when I'm buying toys for my kids those toys have gotten more expensive, especially those goods that are imported from the countries where the tariffs were implemented. The thing about tariffs, though, from like a policy perspective, is that they're kind of like a one-time blow. They don't continually raise prices. So we've already kind of internalized the inflation, which some people would say, well, then tariffs aren't so bad. You just suffer for a little bit and then it's over. But prices don't come back down either. And when people go to buy things, they're not remembering that, or even for mortgage rates, they're not thinking, mortgage rates are lower than what they were last year. They're thinking about how mortgage rates are still so much higher than they were a few years ago. And I think that's why the inflation that happened back in 2022 had such big consequences, even for the 2024 election, because by 2024, people were still pissed. They were still annoyed that things had gotten so expensive so fast. And they didn't want to hear it from any politicians when they were said, like, oh, but inflation's back down now, because they're just saying that, like, well, it's so much more expensive to buy a car than it was 3 years ago, or it's so much more expensive to buy a house or groceries. People remember. They don't just forget once inflation takes effect that it's over now.
Absolutely.
So your expertise is broad, but specifically focusing on housing. And, housing is a question I think is on a lot of people's mind, depending on, I have a relative who's trying to sell a house in California, and, it's tough. Here in Oregon, the prices have come down, which paradoxically seems good, but for homeowners for whom it's come down a bit much, not good, and then, people are in this weird moment in a lot of housing markets where it's like, I can't get off second base because I can't leave it. And I want to run to third, but I can't. And they're like trapped between two bases, basically, with housing. What is the industry thinking as we go forward? Because what would unleash the market for the seller is one thing, but what would unleash the market for the buyer is another thing. And then when rates were so low, we had this perfect storm, right? Where, sure, I can get what I want and you can get a low rate and we're all happy. But now this imbalance, people seem frozen, specifically in markets on the West Coast like me, like California, like Oregon. Things are not great.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
If I could just add on to that, I think it's not just people who are looking to buy or sell a house. It's also the rental market. I mean, I've got a kid that just finished college, and even with a roommate in a nice neighborhood, decent apartment, she's looking at $1,000 a month.
Well, that's good.
But I'm just saying, though, that's with a roommate, though. So you're really talking about 2,000. And granted, this is a different market than some of the bigger ones, but still.
I think this is just me, but with the rentals, I mean, I rented in New York a long time ago, and it was $2,500.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. So rent's rent, but I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing with this condo I'm in. So I'm interested in Daryl's that, and it is an issue. They're staying on the market longer. People are cutting big price cuts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're tapping into is that there's this tension in the two goals that we have for housing. On the one hand, we want it to be affordable for first-time home buyers to buy homes because that is the way that they get into the housing market. So they set themselves up to build wealth. But the way that they build wealth once you are a homeowner is by your home going up in value. And if your home is going up in value, that means that it is inherently more difficult for a first-time home buyer to enter the market because the bar for what you need to become a first-time home buyer goes up as home values go up. And I think this is something that we really have to grapple with as a country, that we can't prioritize both things at the same time.
No.
I think ideally what would make people happier is if your home went up in value 2-3%, maybe just like 1% faster than inflation, so that you as a homeowner can see that your asset is going up in value, but it's not going up in value so much that it becomes unattainable to first-time home buyers. And we're adding supply, especially of starter homes, which we are really bad at building starter homes, like townhomes, duplexes, small lot homes. Those have been largely made illegal because of single family zoning in much of the country. So without these like entry points onto the housing ladder, and also with this desire for homeowners for their homes to always go up in value and for them to essentially get wealthy off of home ownership, we're left in this impossible position where both sides get upset. But I will say that in many southern markets, I'll use Austin as an example, they're really good at building housing. And I think that that's helped them balance these two priorities. Home values went up like astronomically during the pandemic in Austin, peaking in 2022. But then because home values went up so much, all of these builders jumped in to make money off of home values going up and built a bunch of homes. And that allowed prices to come back down. Now, some people who bought at the peak are probably upset that prices went down. But if you zoom out, prices are still above what they were during or before the pandemic. So in the long run, people are still seeing their asset go up in value, but it's not becoming so out of reach that first-time home buyers can't get into the market.
I think it's probably training or getting people psychologically to get off of this, what you were just saying. There was a period of time where you're doing 5%, 10% annually on your house. Like people were counting on that. They're counting on that like as a big piece of their financial puzzle. And that wasn't realistic, obviously, but now nobody wants to let go, to acknowledge that, wait a minute, just your point, we have to have a middle ground. I think some people hear that 1%, 2%, and that's so beyond what they were hoping for that feels like, well, why do it? Why not just rent,
But I think a lot of homeowners, they look at the dollar value of their home going up and they think that they're getting wealthier. But in reality, if you're intending to stay in that home for the long run, like until you pass on or until you go to senior living, what you really want is just a place to live, for your mortgage to be affordable, for you to be able to afford the maintenance. Because I think like the real value you get out of being a homeowner is having a place to live. And if you were to sell and buy again, and you have to buy again at such a high price, then what good is it that your home went up in value because you have to go put all that money into your next home?
And that's why I'm sitting right here. That's why I sold this place.
Yeah. So like, what good is it that your home is so much more valuable than it was 10 years ago if you still can't afford to upgrade to a better home? That's why we need to add more supply to make sure that, it doesn't get so out of hand.
One of the things that we're dealing with, and I'm sure it's this way all over the country, is these, we've got on the mainland entire neighborhoods that are built to rent, single family housing, and they're all for rent. And so I guess that sort of trickles back to the conversation about, do we, I don't know, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think one of the reasons that we're in the shape that we're in has a lot to do with, the fact that we've allowed venture capital and investors to really just build entire neighborhoods that are not homes for sale.
The fact that we've allowed.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's actually a misconception, because if you look at these large investors, these Wall Street investors that own like more than 1,000 homes, they really only make up 1% of the market in terms of homes that are owned and homes that are being purchased. There are some neighborhoods where they are playing a larger role, but the neighborhoods that they tend to focus on are places where the population doesn't, have the credit scores to achieve home ownership, or there's like a large military population where people are moving in and out a lot and they don't really want to own for the long run. So I don't think that that is the cause. It's more of a symptom that home ownership has gotten so expensive that it's out of reach for so many people, and those people still need a place to live. And so their only other option is to rent. And then the investors come in because they see the opportunity that there are all these people who are going to remain renters that still need a place to live. And then they build to rent for that. But it's really the housing affordability piece that's at the root of it. And if you made it so that, for example, rents weren't increasing every year and home values weren't increasing so much every year, investors would pull out because they wouldn't see it as profitable. There are so many, the investors are really just taking advantage of their profit motive. And it's not just the large investors, like these mom and pop investors that own 1 to 5 properties are actually the majority of investors in the housing market. But people don't want to point the finger at them because I think that they see in their minds, that's their personal goal, is to become one of these people that owns multiple homes because that's their path to wealth. They're just upset that that path to wealth is being supplanted by private equity in some cases. But if you took out the private equity investors, they'd probably just be replaced by smaller investors, not necessarily by first-time home buyers.
That's interesting. Marlon,
I just want to add this piece. I'm sorry, I just want to add this piece to it because what's interesting what you said about the mom and pop is I know from several cities, part of the reason mom and pop are in there is a policy issue around both credit scoring and rental history. So you have a large population of people due to their previous rental history, which may have been because of illness, may have been because of irresponsibility, whatever. But I don't know if you know about this, Marlon. There are people who are on lists around this country who cannot rent, cannot get traditional renting for a decade. And yes, that is correct. And we wonder why people are on the street. And the combination of their income and their rental history, the rise of these small mom and pop houses that will take a lower score, will take a riskier renter is the only way, especially in a city like, say, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which has always been house heavy as opposed to apartment heavy. So you have people renting and they don't take great care of these houses, but they'll rent the house. Maybe they'll rent it to 2 people. Maybe they'll separate the rooms. So yeah, there is this hidden industry that nobody talks about that is tied to a policy issue, if that makes sense.
I was just going to say one of the things that you hit on, Daryl, and it's right on the nose. I mean, I am in a community, Camp Lejeune is just right down the road. So it's heavy military. And so that certainly lines up with what you were saying. I guess I don't know. I guess, and I could be looking at or seeing something that's not there, but I look at places like Atlanta. I think at one point there was Invitation Homes and 2 or 3 other private equity, homeowners or home buyers. There were a pretty significant percentage there, and maybe that's just an anomaly.
Yeah, Atlanta did have a large share of these private equity firms coming in. I'm not sure what the motivation was. Maybe it was like an experiment because they do seem to have backed off. And when they backed off, they were more replaced by these smaller investors. The difficulty in owning like thousands of homes is that every single home is unique. So just from an economic perspective, it's hard to scale that as a landlord, as opposed to like an apartment building where every single unit is the same and every toilet's the same and all the plumbing is set up the same. I think the reason why we see so many mom and pop investors is because they're just more uniquely suited to owning a single home, understanding that home, living near it, managing it that way, as opposed to some private equity landlord that is far away, doesn't really understand each home. I think that makes it more challenging for them to actually compete in the market. But they tried in Atlanta. I don't think they succeeded.
So there's a bill that's working its way through Congress, I think, in the last week that's supposed to address some of these issues. Can you, to the extent that you, know the details, I'd be interested to hear what you think about it.
Yeah, so the bill, so originally there was a piece in the bill that would have banned institutional investors, these large investors, from building to rent. But a lot of housing advocates came out against that language because most housing policy people just want to see more supply, and they don't really care if it's rental supply or for sale supply, because we have housing shortages in both sides of the market. So they didn't like that there was this restriction on any kind of building, even if it was built to rent. So that did get removed. But what got left in is a limit on how many single family homes these institutional investors are allowed to own. I don't think it's going to have that big of an impact on housing affordability. I think that it's been kind of held up as like, oh, if we just get Wall Street out of the market, our problems will be solved. But the problems actually run so much deeper than that. But there are some things in it that should help with the overall housing supply problems. There's carrots and sticks for local governments to densify their zoning and to make it less onerous for builders to develop, so the timelines for developing housing get shorter. One of the things that I like in there is financing for manufactured homes and making it easier to develop 3D printed homes or like these modular homes. A lot of the times it's really one of the expenses for building housing is that, like in a city like San Francisco, for example, if you're trying to hire Bay Area labor to build these homes, then that in of itself is going to be expensive. So you can move the manufacturing of the home offsite to a place where it's lower cost. That can help bring down the costs. And also, a lot of people have backyards and are now allowed to build ADUs. It's called additional dwelling units, like these backyard cottages. So if we can make it really easy for people to just buy homes, manufactured homes, plop them down in their backyards, and we can get more housing density and more housing supply that way. So I'm encouraged by that.
Well, the housing density issue is a policy issue, right? And in Oregon, that is one of our policy problems because historically we have an urban boundary, an urban growth. You got a little somebody back there, a little person back there.
Yeah, my kid just came home from school. I was just checking to make sure the door was locked. They might come knocking. I'll have to mute myself for a little bit if they do. Yeah, but they're not here.
We have an urban growth boundary, and we've always had some restrictions on density. Like when you go across the river to Vancouver, there's high density in building there. To me, this is again the tension, right? I look at it, I'm like, it reminds me a bit of a rabbit warren. It's like houses everywhere smashed together, but that's providing space for people, right? So these are some of the tensions we are dealing with here. And in Oregon, one of the things that happened before COVID I don't think they were institutional, but they were groups of investors snapping up homes because they were, quote, cheap here, and flipping them. So they were beating normal purchasers to the punch. So they weren't necessarily keeping it and renting it, but they were gobbling up the supply, flipping it and raising the price. Has that something that has happened other places, or were we unique to that? Or that ended up being a big supply issue here.
Yeah, that is a common dynamic in many places where higher income people are moving into a city. If you have the means to buy a home, like you have the money to do it, you're probably going to want what they call a turnkey home. That means you buy it, you just turn the key, it's ready to go, you can move in. There is a smaller pool of people who have the capital and have the desire to buy a fixer-upper, put their own, sweat equity into the home and improve it in that way. And investors do take advantage, or they fill this gap in the market in places where there are a lot of people who have the money and desire to buy a turnkey home, and they buy up those homes that need work, remove them from the pool of potential homes for people who would be willing to put in the work themselves, or they compete with them, and then they put the work in, they like put some paint on it, maybe do some kind of cosmetic upgrades, and then sell it to somebody who wants.
Gray floors.
Right. Gray floors. Yeah, exactly. But when I bought my home in Seattle, I bought a home that needed work. And I just had the time and the energy to put into fixing it up. And I was the one who ended up getting all the equity out of it, as opposed to it going to some flipper. So yeah, these homes I think can be really attractive if you have the means to do it. And there's actually government loan programs that are specifically targeted for these homes that need rehab, that are for first-time home buyers who want to put the work in. But in markets where they're very competitive, where investors are very active, the investors are the ones that are getting that profit, not necessarily the first-time home buyer.
Yeah, I think it's cooled off post COVID, but pre COVID, it was nuts. I mean,
Yeah.
they were just, gobbling up houses and doing whatever little stuff and then turning them over to, and this is an Oregon thing, but turning them over to Californians.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's who we complain about for the fact that for them, this is cheap, right? And so for us, it was like, wait, what's going on here? All of a sudden prices shoot up. And then of course, post COVID, we're all kind of where we are.
Well,
But I
that's
will
the
point out that it's not usually Wall Street or the big investors that
Correct.
are doing this. It's just people who have a side
Groups of
hustle who figured
investors.
out that like they can have this gig buying homes and flipping them. I mean, that's why you see like there's all these TV shows about flipping
Right.
houses. It's
But to
become
your
this
point, people
side
don't
hustle
think
for people.
they only think about Wall Street. They don't think about the impact of that. And
Mhm.
and if it's a group of 10 friends and you're buying 10 houses, well, that's 10 houses out of our stock. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like that is a thing. That ended up being a thing and it got very intense here pre-COVID. So
Oh,
yeah.
it was even worse here because the weather's nice most of the
Yeah.
time. Not that Oregon isn't, but what we had was, it was just a straight arbitrage. People moving from Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, coming here. They've just sold their house for 7 figures, and they could buy a house here for half that. And I mean, it was great, I guess, while it lasted, but it also it just jacked up the price of real estate here tremendously. I mean, people were coming down here and buying houses for cash.
Mhm.
House on the market one day and it's gone.
Mhm.
And so now we have an interesting problem, and it may be unique to this area because it's sort of a resort, or not so much resort, a vacation spot, where people come this time of year especially. And one of the problems that we're running into is that the cost of living in this area has gotten so expensive that people are having a hard time finding workers because people,
Mhm.
restaurant, we happen to live here. Our daughter is, getting herself together. But in the meantime, she's a server at one of the restaurants. But they are having a hell of a time finding people because people her age can't afford to live here.
It's not just you. We
I
had the
mean,
same problem in
it's the
Florida.
closest Wilmington, 30 miles away, and nobody's going to drive that, from there to here to wait tables.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's this generational injustice that happens in housing where older people who have owned their homes for decades, they're completely insulated from rising housing costs, or mostly insulated because their mortgage is fixed or maybe their mortgage is paid off. Their property taxes are usually limited because a lot of governments put in caps on how much property taxes can go up for existing homeowners. But for first-time home buyers, they have to come in at whatever the prevailing price is, pay the higher mortgage rate that exists now. It's nearly 7% for a 30-year fixed rate compared to 3% during the pandemic when everyone was able to refinance. So the cost of occupying a home in many cities, if you're just looking at everybody who lives in that city, it's going to be way higher for first-time home buyers, younger generations, than it is for older generations. And the older generations are retired or near retirement. They're not the ones necessarily fulfilling these jobs. So then it becomes this broader economic problem where the people who want to hire people to work in the city can't find anybody who can afford to live in the city. They have to have people do these long commutes. And it really is to a detriment even to the older generations because they want to be able to enjoy their city and like go to the restaurants and have servers at those restaurants or have like a vibrant economy in general. But the way the housing market is set up, it's just really difficult for young people to break in and to be able to get that same path to economic prosperity that previous generations were able to get.
We have the same problem here, and especially in Bend and other resort-ish, vacation areas. It's impossible. It's incredibly hard for them to. And then again, post-COVID, we have seen a real drop in service industry workers here in Portland. It's very hard. You have people now who are closed 2 days a week. With their restaurant because they can't staff it, or changing hours, and then that has a trickle effect on small businesses because now they have this problem. So it's a big problem, and that leads me to the job market. And I know we're talking about housing, but there's been this headline that has come up a couple times in the last few weeks. It says America's job market looks strong, So why are people having such a hard time finding work? What is the paradox here? You know, you see the administration officials get on TV and say everything's great. You had that one crazy guy say, oh, people's credit card debt is going up. That means people are in a spending mood. Baby, where'd you go to school? I went to law school, and I know better than that. But you know, so there is this paradox where we keep being told, oh, the numbers are good, the fundamentals are good, and yet I thought it was just me talking to people, but these headlines keep coming out. People are having a hard time finding work. So what's the disconnect?
Yeah, so there's a difference between the unemployment rate and the ability to find a job. We have what economists call a low hire, low fire environment, which means that employers are not doing layoffs broadly. I mean, there's a few pockets of layoffs, but they're not hiring workers either. And it's especially difficult for recent college graduates trying to find entry-level work, because when those jobs don't open up, there's like no way for them to get onto the career ladder. And you hear these stories about people graduating from college and it taking like several months, over a year for them to find work, or they have to accept a job that is way outside of what they went to school for in order to find work. And yet the unemployment rate is low. And it's low because, yeah, the people who had jobs going into this economy, for the most part, still have jobs, but they're holding on to those jobs because they know that if they were to voluntarily quit and find another job, it would be very difficult for them. And that's not good for the economy. Like a healthy economy, you want people moving around in jobs a lot, because it makes it so that workers are better at negotiating better wages when they feel like they have a lot of options. And you also have people able to find jobs that really fit their specific skills. Like if you're a worker and you're sick of your job, it's not what you want to do, you want to do something else, you don't have the environment that would make you want to make that kind of jump right now, because you don't know what's on the other side, if anyone's going to hire you if you try to switch jobs or switch industries right now.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is, you know, you can't even turn the television on now without hearing AI.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's almost comical when I'm driving around and I hear these commercials and everybody, you know, no matter what they do, they have to put AI in there somewhere, you know, because it's the hot thing. And I'm just kind of curious because what I've noticed is some of the layoffs at places like I'm thinking Amazon, I believe they seem to be like white collar layoffs. And I wonder what is your concern about where, as you know, as we start experiencing, to the extent that AI costs jobs, do you think it's low level, middle? I mean, is it across the board? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I don't think it's really about specific jobs going away. Economists are trying to get the word out that it's about tasks going away, not jobs entirely. And but what I mean by tasks is that, like, the task, for example, of data entry, taking like a PDF or something that's, you know, in a textbook and putting it into a digital format in an Excel spreadsheet, that used to be a job. That was like the kind of work I would do when I was an entry-level worker. That has been completely obsolesced by AI. Now AI will read the PDF for you, put it all in a spreadsheet, which is great from a certain perspective, because like, who likes to do data entry? It's a very monotonous, tedious job. But for the entry-level worker, that was the way that they got their foot in the door to these corporations, was just doing these kind of monotonous tasks that nobody else wanted to do. So I think that's why, like, it feels like white collar work is being more impacted, because I think the structure of these corporate jobs was to put a lot of these monotonous tasks onto entry level workers or to admin workers. So I think that there are some types of jobs that have a lot more of these monotonous roles that are being taken over by AI. But I think, you know, give it some time, and who knows where AI is going in the future, but give it some time. I think that there will be different kinds of entry level work, because there's always going to be work that nobody else wants to do. It used to be like fetching coffee or something like that, or you know, calling up an unpleasant client and telling them bad news. Like, these are the kinds of things that a lot of people don't want to do.
For
And
sure.
I think that these entry level roles are going to be redesigned, but for the time being, and I think this has to do with interest rates being high, with the economy maybe being weaker than it could be right now, instead of firms being really ambitious about hiring entry-level workers and figuring out new tasks for them to do or important tasks for them to do. They're just kind of telling their existing workers, we're not going to hire you, that intern. We're not going to hire you, this entry-level worker, to help you. You're just going to figure it out all for yourself. Mm-hmm. But I think in the long run, what firms are going to have to realize is that AI can do the same for one firm as it can for another firm. So the only way to compete in the marketplace is to hire people to go above and beyond what AI is capable of. And that's going to require actually hiring more people to do that, not fewer. The firms that really just try to cut and dump everything on AI, I think, are setting themselves up for failure, because, you know, somebody just working at home on their laptop can do that. They can automate AI to do the things that, say, like, I don't know, an accountant,
appointments,
an accounting firm could do. Yeah. All that kind of stuff. So if I think the firms that are cutting back on workers right now are probably the ones that are going to get outcompeted either by entrepreneurs, and the ones that are trying to figure out, like, well, how can we make what we do even more unique, stand out even more, are the ones that are going to survive all of this. They always talk about how jobs are going away, but I feel like they should be talking about how some of these corporations are just going to go away if they don't figure out how to be better than what any
Say more about
can
that
do with AI.
That's an interesting.
Well, you know what's interesting to me? One standard is I have a friend who does document review. So if you're familiar with legal world, there are millions and millions of documents. And what doc review seems to have found is, guess what? AI is not reliable enough to do doc review. Even with specialized programming, you need people. You need verification of whatever it is. And so I think we miss that. And there was some conversation that some companies are using AI as an excuse to cut costs and basically just have their workers do twice as much. I mean, they're like, oh, AI, but it's not AI. It's just that they are using that as why they're not high. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think I think that because we're in this economy where interest rates are higher, inflation is higher, firms are trying to figure out how to do more with less. They're saying that the problem is AI, but really the problem is that the cost of debt has gone up and they can't actually afford to keep these workers. And they think AI is going to be their saving grace. But now what we're hearing is that these AI costs, these costs of tokens, are like way higher than what these companies thought they were going to be. So they're actually, some of them, in a worse position because they let go of these workers. And then now they're worried about how much you're spending on AI. It's just like they've created a new problem. And then I think back to what you said about, like, these companies that will go away. I think it's, like I said, I think it's the ones that just try to put everything on AI without trying to figure out how to be better than AI. But one that comes to mind is like these aggregators like kayak.com, not to call them out too much, but like that's the kind of thing where I think people are just going to go to their chat bot and say, like, find me the best flight. They don't need to necessarily go to one of these websites to do it. But there's probably even more that I'll just have to think more creatively about. But you got to do something better than what AI can do in this new world.
Well, for me, I think of things also from a legal perspective, having practiced law, I think people are potentially opening themselves up to some big liability with not being careful about putting so much on AI. Because I was just talking to somebody, I was back in Chicago for a law professor's retirement, and they were talking about a specialized instrument they got and there was errors. Even in this specialized, oh, we got this specialized thing, don't worry. It's still, so there's still this potential liability out here too, with people who are not careful and not checking, and who are using AI as a crutch or not realizing. And there are a good group of people, surprise me every day, who don't realize you cannot turn everything over without checking. And people are in fact doing that. And I think that's a potential legal risk. I have another economy question. I know we're getting short on time, which is this idea of the K economy. Are
you read my mind, Shari?
Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go, Marlon. Are we in a K economy? Is that a real thing? And do you want to explain what that means?
Yeah, I would say we're in a K-shaped economy, and with interest rates being higher, that is something that is contributing to the K-shaped economy, as you brought up before. So when interest rates go up, it makes it more expensive to be a person who has debt, and it makes it more lucrative to be a person who has savings, because if interest rates are higher, that means if you're loaning out money, you're able to get a higher interest rate. You're making more money off of these loans that you're giving out. But as somebody who has loans like credit card loans or auto loans, or if you're trying to buy a home right now, you are the one getting hit the hardest by these higher interest rates. So that's one version of the K-shaped economy. Another thing that shows that's a K-shaped economy is just how well the stock market is doing, better than what we're seeing in terms of like economic indicators outside of the stock market, which means that if you happen to own stock, which most people don't own stock, it's just like the top earners or the wealthiest people who own stock in this country, you have gotten richer. And you can see this in San Francisco specifically. I've been looking at the San Francisco housing market, and their luxury market has just taken off in this unbelievable way. Sales are up like, I want to say like 40% year over year for the luxury market. And it's what we're hearing from our agents who work in the San Francisco market is that it's these people getting hired by AI companies, getting $500,000 signing bonuses that are going and taking that money and putting it straight into housing. Or on the even higher end, it's these executives or these investors in AI companies that have gotten so wealthy and they put it into housing. When people get more money, they tend to put more money into where they live. So you can see it playing out in the Bay Area in particular, how the AI economy has really benefited a narrow group of people so much more than I think most people feel like AI has benefited the average person.
You know, I was just reading the New York Times, though, about New York, which, you know, Mondami, everybody's going to leave. They're still there as of right now. And that New York has always been a cash place, but that there was a spike, I think in 2025 near the end, of cash purchasing. And when we talking cash purchasing, we talking $15 million cash purchasing, $20 million cash purchasing. I mean, so that means that top of that K is doing great. They got a whole different world up there, right? So the K is, am I making the K? Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
so the K is the people up here, and most of us are in this descending part of that K, right?
Yes. And I think like what maybe is a lot, like some economists will say, well, like the bottom of that K is actually better off than they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, however far back in time you want to go. There's less poverty in America. The unemployment rate isn't so bad as it used to be. So they say like, yes, it's not so bad that these billionaires are doing better because the people at the bottom are doing a little bit better. But then I think everyone else is like, well, how come they get, like the people at the top get to do 100 times better and we only get to do like 5% better? It just doesn't seem fair. And at the same time, these things that seem to be more accessible, like homeownership in particular, have become out of reach, especially for young people, especially for middle income people. It's just so far beyond what they can afford in many American cities that even if maybe they're earning higher hourly wages or they have better food security than past generations did, they still can't achieve the American dream. And the American dream is the American dream in people's minds. So I think that is making people feel a lot worse off than what some of the other economic indicators show.
So Daryl, I guess, boy, this goes so fast. We're already at the top of the hour. I guess maybe a closing question, and Shari, you may have one, but I'm just curious. And I've got a lot of questions, but this I think is probably the most relevant. What is it that you're looking at over, say, the course of the next year? What do you think we should be looking at that most people aren't paying attention to?
Well, I think most people don't pay attention to maybe inflation as much as economists paying attention to inflation, because inflation is the thing that will require the Fed to potentially raise interest rates that could set us on the path towards having a much slower economy, maybe even on the path towards having a recession. Post-pandemic, everyone was talking about how the Fed needs to do this soft landing because inflation got so bad that they need to like bring it down without sending us into a recession. They succeeded in that, but now we have the trade war, we have the conflict in Iran, and they're kind of back in that same position where they have to fight inflation without sending us into a recession. And they pulled it off last time. I'm not sure what the outcome is going to be this time, but if inflation keeps getting out of hand, then they're going to have to slow down the economy, which will mean that people lose more jobs, as we were talking about before. And that could really just change the dynamic of the economy. But then you also have AI, which I think everybody else is paying attention to. So that's something else, is like, how is this new technology changing our economy. Maybe it's making us more resilient because when people lose their jobs, they can just open up their computer and ask AI, like, how can I make some money? And AI will give them 10 suggestions, and maybe they'll go off and do one of those suggestions.
So I'm not the only person doing
3
that.
of those suggestions might be illegal, however. So
yeah, talk to a lawyer first. Yeah, you still need that human oversight. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely an exciting time to be an economist because everybody always asks me, like, is this like anything we've seen before in the economy? And the answer is no. We're just in completely uncharted territory. It kind of looks a little similar to things that have happened in the past, but it's never been quite like this before.
So I have one quick question, which is I've heard a lot of people say, is home ownership still the way to go? I don't know if and I know you work for Redfin, but a lot of people are like, I don't know. I think I should rent. I don't think it's the way to go. It's not like I could get in the 40s. We're never going to get the benefit those people got. This is just not the way. What do you say to young people specifically who are really asking that question?
I mean, it really just comes down to your own personal circumstances. I think the rule of thumb that I tell people, I've even just told my sister-in-law this, is that if you think you're going to stay in the same home for at least 5 years, you're probably better off owning that home versus renting. Because after those 5 years, instead of paying off the interest on your home, you'll start to pay down the equity. You will, if mortgage rates were to fall, you could refinance into a lower mortgage rate and bring down your mortgage payment even more. And if you're the kind of person who wants flexibility, where you want to be able to pick up and move to a new city or move across town, then renting is going to be better for you because the cost of buying and selling a home detracts from the value you get out of owning the home. So it's more about time in the market than timing the market. That's what I think a lot of traders talk about. And that's very true for home ownership. Because there's always been markets in the United States where home values don't go up very fast. That's more of a coastal thing where people expect their home to go up in value every single year. And in these affordable parts of the country, people still find value in being homeowners versus being a renter because it's about the time you put into the home and you taking on some of the maintenance or the value you get out of modifying the home to your own personal taste that makes it worthwhile. So that's what I tell people.
Better. Yeah. You're making me feel better. I'm on my 6th year in this condo, which I did personalize the way I wanted it. So that.
So I think if you went back 6 years, I think it would hopefully be obvious to you that you were better off buying 6 years ago than you would have been renting. Even with all the challenges that you face right now, you're probably better off having had made that choice 6 years ago.
Well, all right. This has been a great conversation, Daryl. I really appreciate you making time for us. And Shari, I'm so glad that I had sense enough to bring you into the conversation to help me out. And this is something that we, we're trying to do because there's just no shortage of, like the rage-inducing stuff that we all see. And I just really appreciate you coming on and helping us have an educated and substantive conversation, Daryl.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and awesome. We just want to say, yay, Daryl. Super, your credentials, your expertise, and your position. We salute you and support your position. So yay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, folks, I hope that you enjoyed this. By the way, this will, as paid subscribers, this will be in your inbox. I'm going to say within the next 24 hours, full recording, and we'll post some clips on social media and so forth, so we can kind of get the word out. Until next time, Shari, thanks again. Daryl, much appreciated. And hopefully we can do this again when the economy isn't so confusing.
I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I'll come back anyway.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Folks, until next time, take care.
Bye.
All right, bye.